Hi, thanks for coming. As I introduced myself earlier, my name is Cornel. I'm running a business in Singapore called studiocgartist.com, and so I'm going to share my own perspective on where we stand in VR, what tools, what techniques, and what challenges we're facing. And this is from my perspective as a CG guy. I'm more, my background is actually in 3D and post-production. And, but it's interesting to look at how the VR tool set constantly changes, and you know that's of course a concern for people who want to produce VR content, because you want to know if the stuff you're producing is going to be, compatible in the future. I started to get into VR in 2013. Before that, as I mentioned, I was involved in post-production, doing motion graphics, 3D, and then I was introduced to the development kit 1. I still have it. I hope one day it will be a collector's item. It's a beauty, I think, still, the box, the original development kit 1. And since then, I've been hooked, and I've been developing all sorts of demos, apps, and most of the time I use VR as a tool to visualize 3D visualizations for my clients. So basically, as part of my lineup of tools, when I do a product design, I, of course, do a render, and then very often I present it in VR to my clients. So very often when you talk to people about VR, the term hype comes up. And of course, hype is an issue. And are you guys familiar with the famous Gardner hype curve? Have you seen that before? Yeah. So basically, you can apply that to any new technology. Whenever you have a technological breakthrough, you have a trigger, and that causes unrealistic expectations, and then people overshoot, and investors get crazy and put a lot of money into it, and then all of a sudden people realize, oh, man, we got a little ahead of ourselves, and then you dive into the valley of inflated expectations, into complete disillusionment until you reach the plateau of productivity. So the question here is what time scale to apply, because we had this hype curve before. As I mentioned earlier, in the 90s, when the concept of VR was first introduced, there was a huge hype, and of course back then computers were way too slow, and it was completely unrealistic to do any convincing VR, and it ended up being used in scientific research. But this time, I think the beginning of the hype was actually when Facebook bought over Oculus, which was around 2014, and then in between then and I believe, and that's my personal gut feeling, my personal expectation, that we will see it leveling off in the fourth quarter of 2018. That could be wrong, but that's my expectation, because right now there's still so much going on. There's so many new headsets coming out. Technology is changing all the time, and especially the fourth quarter of this year, it's going to be very busy with new headsets, new cameras, and all sorts of stuff. And that's going to take some time to penetrate the market. And in the fourth quarter of 2018, then we should really know where we stand. At that point in time, there should be a real market for VR. But that, as I said, is my own projection. I could be completely wrong. That's just my projection on what I know. Okay. So a quick overview over HMDs in case, you don't know. This is pretty common knowledge. But what's interesting is you have, of course, the high end, the Vive, the HTC Vive, the Oculus, the PlayStation VR, even though it doesn't have the good tracking that the Vive and the Oculus have, which the high-end headsets are difficult to set up. That's why we don't have them here. It takes time to set up the room scale. But if you're really interested in experiencing a high-end VR setup, there's a bunch of VR arcades in KL. One is, I think, is called VR Lab. So I would recommend to check it out. So what's important to note is the high-end VR headsets all have 6 degrees of freedom, which means positional tracking and rotational tracking, and they have motion controllers with 6 degrees of freedom. And then you have the mobile lineup, the Gear VR and the Google Daydream. And then what's really important is later this year we will have the Windows 10 mixed reality lineup of headsets coming out. And those are based on a completely different technology. It's called inside-out tracking, which means it's easier to set up. It's also less expensive. And I believe this is going to change the market considerably because it makes everything more accessible, and it's also part of the Windows 10 ecosystem. So we will see headsets by Lenovo, Asus, Acer, HP, and Dell. And they call it mixed reality. The term mixed reality is used in different contexts. Mixed reality is used here because they also have AR headsets. Like the first one here in this line is the HoloLens, which is an AR headset. The other ones are pure VR headsets. So when these headsets come out by the end of the year, they of course need some time to penetrate the market. So by next year, we will see a lot of them. And then I believe this is really the time when it all takes off. And in terms of numbers, the Gear VR is expected to sell almost 7 million by the end of this year, which is a big number. To put it in perspective, you could compare it to the launch of the first iPhone, or you could compare it to the PlayStation 2. It was because last year the numbers were about 5 million sold, and they're just way ahead of everyone else. And here is a quick overview over the expected numbers, projections by an analyst company. But you have to take it with a grain of salt because these analysts are very often wrong. There's one company called Super Data, which always gives out wrong projections. They're always overshooting. So, but anyways, what you see here is, what's striking is the huge penetration of smartphone VR based market shares, and in comparison to augmented reality, where the numbers are not nearly as high. But of course, you can argue over that. And that's the fun of it. That's the fun of VR, of arguing over what is going to come through and what's not going to come through. So when you talk to people, very often you hear that that people think, why isn't VR more visible? You hardly see it in public spaces. There's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of articles, but it hasn't really reached the mainstream, and you know, there must be a reason for that. So one of the reasons is, of course, the prices have to come down, because it's still expensive. If you want to have a high-end setup, you have to buy the high-end graphics card, and you have to invest in a nice computer, and the headset comes on top of that. Then everyone is waiting for a bigger field of view. Right now, the better headsets have around 110 degrees field of view. And if you go below 110, you really get that tunnel vision. Like, for example, some of the cheaper cardboards, you know, it looks like you're looking through a tube. And that, of course, doesn't help immersion. You know, for immersion, you need the wide field of view to really feel you're inside of that world. So, field of view is super important, and every degree counts. For example, the Gear VR has around 101 degrees, and it was previously around, I think, 98 before, and these few degrees made a huge difference. So every degree in field of view is super important for immersion. The next thing is higher resolution displays. Like, everyone's waiting for 4K, you know, because a common complaint is that the resolution is too low. You get the screen door effect, and that's true. You know, in the end, consumers are used to like super high resolution smartphones and TVs. They expect the same level of quality from the headset. At some point, we will get 4K, but it's going to take some time. Then the last point is premium experiences and AAA titles. So what people are waiting for is like something in terms of like a Netflix-style series, like a premium series that keeps you engaged, and AAA titles along the lines of Call of Duty, like some big games that make it into VR. So there needs to be a lot more of that for VR to get adopted in a much wider range. So, talking about video, because in discussions with people, there's always a lot of confusion of what is VR, what is not VR, what is 360. We just earlier had a discussion about is 360 really VR or not? I mean, my attitude is like anything that is immersive and has at least 3 degrees of freedom is VR. That's where VR starts. And at the high end, you have a room scale VR. And everything in between are different shades of, or different kinds of VR. For video, and you guys are, you know, filmmakers, there's basically 4 different types. You have interactive video, image, and motion graphics-based VR apps. So basically, these are apps that have different media types that can be activated. You have hotspots, you have teleportation points, and they're compiled into an app. And from that app, you can launch different video experiences that are VR experiences. Then you have the linear 360 video. And linear 360 video is a very common type, very often, because you know these 360 cameras are pretty cheap. So you see that a lot, and in my eyes, it's very often not very interesting because it's not even stereoscopic. You know, it's just 360 video. It's pretty lame. It's just a panoramic image wrapped around your head. It doesn't have any depth, and that's why it doesn't, you know, it's not as convincing. And then the next one is you have linear stereoscopic 360 video. And then it gets more interesting because there you have the depth of 3D, but of course you have a lot more data. You have a lot of more issues you have to deal with as a filmmaker. And then there is linear stereoscopic 180 video called VR 180. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later because I'm a believer in VR 180. And some 360 purists would probably hate me for that, but I think VR 180 is a great format, and just recently Google came up with a new standard that defines VR 180. So I'm going to talk a bit about it later. Actually, this is the same graphic Lionel used earlier. So we were talking earlier that we hope we don't have too much overlap, but too bad. This is one of them, but I hope you can handle it. So, I mean, it's important to talk about the difference, and because some people get it confused all the time, what VR, like game engine based VR is compared to video based VR. So in 360 180 VR video, you have live action that is captured, it's stationary, and it's an experience that's tied to the camera position. So that's very important to understand. And as opposed to VR apps that are game engine based. In a game engine VR app that can also contain video, a environment is created by the game engine. You can walk around with software controls or by a room scale setup. So this is an example of a room scale setup with motion trackers where you can change your position. So basically you can explore your space with an easily changed point of view. So you have to distinguish between these two different types of VR setups. And that's a huge difference from VR video to game engine based VR. And I talked earlier about VR 180. I'm a huge fan of it. It's not too long ago. It was introduced by Google on June 22nd. It's just a month ago that it was introduced. And the idea behind it is to make things easier. And the quote here from Google is, our goal with VR 180 is to simplify VR video production for all creators, consumers, and high-end video producers as well. The URL is here at google.com/VR180 if you want to check it out. It's a very new standard. And I have to point out, VR 180 has been around before. People have been doing VR 180, but it has not been defined as a standard with specific features by Google. And these features are really good, and I'm going to explain them real quick. First of all, let me go to the advantages of 180. If you shoot video, you have a controlled perspective. You can direct the viewer focus. And you can put your lighting and your crew behind the camera, because in 360 you can't do that, right? I mean, that's one of the problems in 360 production, that you cannot easily put up a lighting rig and light your scene. You have to kind of mount things and hide them away. Your crew has to hide if you shoot 360. So you have all these issues. In 180, you basically shoot like you would shoot with a regular camera. The next point is editing. No stitching needed. I mean, that's a big one, because stitching is a pain. And it follows standard formats: 720p, 1080p, 4K. Then one of the biggest advantages, I believe, is the quality. The resolution is optimized for the viewable area. So all the resolution that's usually wasted on the back is put in front of you. And then one of the biggest advantages, I believe, is the user experience, and that's credit to Google. They created this format so you can watch a video on a desktop or a mobile phone. and it looks like a regular video, and then you can activate VR and you put on your headset and dive into the video. So basically, it's a seamless experience in and out of VR. So that's, and I believe this is the future of VR actually, because to seamlessly go in when you want to and then go out and continue watch outside. So these are huge advantages. And so you may say, like, what's the difference from VR 180 to just stereoscopic filmmaking? Because stereoscopic filmmaking has been around. People have been doing dual lens films. The difference is, of course, the headset, the delivery format. The delivery format, you deliver to a headset, and it's fully immersive. It's just 360 cut in half. Basically, the back is black, and you have 180 in front of you. And the great thing is, you're not wasting energy on stuff that's in the back of you. And I'm going to talk about it later, like in what cases this would be a great format. In other cases, 360 is still a valid format, of course. But I strongly believe that a lot of projects don't need 360. A lot of projects are fine with 180. But that's, of course, something you can discuss. It's something that can be debated. And it's an interesting discussion. Okay. I just took one of the earlier examples of VR 180. I pulled it from the Google site and threw it into Resolve. DaVinci Resolve. Is anyone using DaVinci Resolve? I'm just curious. Yeah. So, I mean, DaVinci Resolve used to be a color grading solution, and now it has become a fabulous video editing program. You know, it's just amazing. And the reason why I did that was I just wanted to look at the format, the frame rate, and basically this was the very first VR 180 video that was put up by YouTube. It's by a social media star called Poppy. I have never heard of her before. That's this lady here. But as you can see, there's very little distortion. And so the left and the right eye have a bit of a soft frame around them that you can do that, or you don't have to. It just makes it easier on the eyes if you look away from the focus area. So I'm showing this to demonstrate what a great format that it is, because it's easy to handle. It follows the standard format, and it's not very distorted, so it's pretty easy to handle. In a little bit, I'm going to talk more about 360, the cases where I believe 360 is still important, because there are cases where you need 360, and when you do 360 post-production, I think you guys have been doing talks on post-production, right? So, I mean, there's all sorts of tools to address the problems you get with 360 video. For me, I'm doing this from a perspective of a CG person. Whenever I use like video, it's usually stuff that has been rendered out, so 3D animation that is rendered out. I have a video and I want to do something in post-production, so for me what is important is basically the compositing part. But if, as a filmmaker, if you produce a film with a 360 rig, you have a number of issues you have to address. These are, number one is camera alignment, number two is image stitching, then spherical compositing, rendering, and shot review. So these are the areas that you have to address and post. And there's one solution by the Foundry. The Foundry is the company behind Nuke. I don't know if you guys know Nuke. Nuke is like the gold standard for compositing. Like all the big movies are all done in Nuke. So it's the gold standard for compositing in high-end film production. And Cara VR is a plugin for Nuke, which covers all these areas. So this is like the high-end solution. It's pretty expensive. I think Nuke is around $3,500, and the plugin itself is around $4,000. So it's not cheap. But then the other one is the other post-production tool is Metal Skybox, which works with After Effects and Premiere, and they have recently been taken over by Adobe. And so basically, it's a similar thing where you use the tools to do compositing and post-production for 360 videos. So what I mentioned earlier is, if you talk VR 180 versus 360, and I'm bringing this up because I really believe in VR 180. For other people, it may not even be an issue to talk about, but I believe it's really a good alternative for a lot of things. 360 is great for travel destination previews, real estate presentations, street view apps. For example, there's a bunch of apps that use the Google API and pull the Google data into an app. Of course, for that you need 360. And then exploration apps with hotspots, stuff that Lionel was talking about earlier, where you are in a virtual environment and you don't know where to go. You have to explore. You have to find your way. Basically, everything is open. You need to explore, and that's of course great for museums, exhibitions, anything where you have an open world and you want your audience to find their own way. VR 180 is great for storytelling in a lot of specific ways, I would think. Interviews, concert performances, and VR video blogs. One good example is, for example, a performance, a concert. If you film a concert in 360, you want to see, let's say you have a band that's playing, you want to see the band, you don't need to see the audience, maybe you look once to your back and look around yourself once. And there's actually scientific data on user behavior in 360. And what people found out was that only very few people actually do look to the back when they watch 360 video. And the user behavior changes. Very often people, when they encounter it for the first time, they look around, they say, wow, this is amazing. And but after your after your 10th 360 video, like people just, they know what it is and they just look ahead and they hardly ever look to the back, And so we have to consider all this if we produce immersive video, the user behavior, and if we can save ourselves some resolution and some painful stitching and editing. I think for a lot of things, VR 180 is a great solution, especially when you have a clear focus on a performance where you don't need to see the back. Okay. So here's my personal take on what I think the opportunities for filmmakers are, from what I have observed, from my perspective as a consumer of VR videos. First of all, VR, the empathy machine is a word that has been used a lot. Immersion, intimacy, empathy, because you're so immersed in the storytelling, you cannot escape. You're basically confronted with whatever you put in front of the face of someone. So that's a big difference to traditional film. Then you have storytelling innovation. It's an open playground for experimentation. People can use a 360 environment to have different storytelling approaches. You can compare that to experimental theater, where you basically are in the middle of a theater performance and something unexpected happens behind your back. Then another opportunity is VR is a new media channel with a lot of attention. So if you do something in VR, people listen to you and people pay attention because it's a new medium. People want to know what's going on. People are curious what you do. It's a great way to reach out to people that otherwise may not be interested in the subject. So it's a great way to also get press coverage and then a good thing is if you do an app-based VR experience, you can combine formats. So basically, if you do a VR app and not just the footage, where you compile it into an interactive app, you can mix 360 with 180. There's no rule that says you can do that. Basically, for example, what people do, what I've seen is you enter the app, you have a kind of a lobby where that can also be, for example, a still image, and then you have hotspots where you launch a video experience from these hotspots, and depending on the content type, that could either be 360 or it could be 180. For example, you could have some content types that are exploration based, and then you would have another content type that would be more a video blog type that would be 180. So you're open to play with combinations of formats. And then you can experiment with perspective and perception. And I've been hearing about some interesting experiments people have been doing. For example, recently I heard about one thing where a filmmaker had an audience. He handed out the headsets to everyone, and people were watching his film. And so later, after watching the film, they were discussing it. But what people didn't know, they all had a different version of the film. So the audience was thinking they were watching the same film, while actually there were differences in the film. So it's kind of a social experiment where you play with people's expectations. That's also something that's interesting that you can do in VR. You can think outside of the box and do social experiments with perception and perspective. And the other thing is what Lionel mentioned, positional audio, also called spatial audio, because in 360 you can precisely position your audio. It's not just stereo. You can put coordinates on a precise position of an audio, which means you could have someone speak behind your shoulder and then you turn around and you have a surprise or something. So just real quick, because we were talking about it earlier about camera rigs. And I just want to touch this briefly, because if you want to create a video-based VR app, as opposed to just footage that you put on a video platform, the workflow, of course, is you capture, you edit, and then you assemble things in the app. And if we're talking about capturing, there's all these, we had a discussion earlier, there's all these different camera rigs. And there's not really a standard, because you can have a completely crazy over-the-top rig with like 20 cameras, or you can have like a simple one with 4 cameras. Like here on the left, the first one here is a rig based on RED cameras. This one is one with ARRI Alexas. The camera below it is a jaunt custom development. John is like a venture capital funded VR broadcast startup. Then a GoPro rig, and below at the very bottom, there's two cameras that are very affordable. One is the Vuse, the one on the right. That's a 360 stereoscopic camera, which is a few $100s. You know, I'm not sure if it's officially out yet, but the quality is quite good. So it's pretty affordable. You know, you can. I think it's around like $600 to $800 or something, and it does the stitching internally, which is also great. And of course, if you have automatic stitching done inside of the camera, you have to compromise. You know, you will not get like the super perfect stitching. And the Lucid Cam is a crowd-funded camera, which is also based on the 180 concept. I checked out the samples. It's also quality looks pretty good. I think they postponed their launch to August now. They have been postponing it for a while. And in terms of assembly, I mean, Lionel talked about it briefly. In the beginning, you only had your game engines, but now you have additional tools that you can use. I personally use the Unreal Engine. For Unity, you have a plugin that's called HeadJack, which is interesting. That's focused on video. You can, you know, they have a template system where you can use templates. If you want to have the super easy, painless solution that's very easygoing, you can try InstaVR. I recently checked it out. It's actually quite good. You know, it does a really good job. You have to pay if you want to get rid of the branding. So that if the free version has branding, of course you cannot use it professionally, but it's super straightforward. You import your video. You can put hotspots on video. You can put audio layers on top of it, music, and it flawlessly compiles an app that runs on the Gear VR, for example. I tested it. It works quite well. And I believe you have to pay around $400. It's like $400 a month subscription, but you could, for example, prepare all your projects and then just buy a subscription for 1 month and then compile it all and then cancel the subscription if you wanted to. You know? Just an idea. Anyways, so Lionel was earlier talking about depth kit. A new trend in post-production and VR video is volumetric video, and in that context, one interesting technique is photogrammetry. So photogrammetry is a technique where you capture, you're scanning the world. You have cameras. The cameras not only capture the surface, but it also captures the geometry. It captures, like for example, this is an example here of a complete environment. Very often what people do is they use drones. Drones fly over the whole thing with cameras and capture all the buildings, all the environment, and then later you have an image that is walkable. So basically you have an image that you can walk through in VR. The problem with that is you have very dense data. For example, here on the right, here's a close-up. You can see it's very dense geometry. For game engines, that's always a problem because in game engines you want to keep your geometry clean and efficient. So that's why you have to make a decision where your preferences are. But the concept is basically summed up in these images here. The camera calculates from the different positions where the different positions in space are and generates the image and the geometry and recreates reality that can be later used in a game engine. And a new trend is to use this basic technique in video, and that's why people came up with the idea of volumetric video, which was used in that production that Lionel was mentioning, Blackout. But this is still an emerging technology. It's not refined yet, so people are experimenting with it and trying to see what you can do with it. And the other interesting trend to watch is live performance capture, because with live performance capture, it's motion capture, but it's live in a game engine. Motion capture has been done for a long time, but usually there's a whole pipeline where you capture performance, and then in post-production you process it. The new thing is the live aspect of it, and then if you have a live performance capture, you can theoretically combine it with, for example, some photogrammetry environment, and you can like go crazy with like creating outrageous new worlds that are partially real, partially not real. I mean, partially CG, and there's a whole new playground of possibilities on how to capture things and combine them with CG. Yes. Something I wanted to briefly touch on, because in video apps, very often what Lionel mentioned earlier is, you do have hotspots where you can jump from position to position. The typical case is, for example, you have real estate presentations. In real estate presentations, people want to see the house. They have different hotspots. You jump to the hotspots, see the kitchen, go from the kitchen to the bedroom. I mean, you jump along hotspots. In a game engine, of course, this is all you're actually moving in that game space. But in video, it means, of course, you only have a static video that has been captured once. So basically, what you do in video is you jump to a different video. So you capture the different positions with the camera, and then you jump between the different video files, and that gives you the illusion of jumping between different points of view. So I just wanted to clarify that difference. I just wanted to briefly talk about VR and marketing. I mean, there are some classics. The displays was mentioned earlier. These are like famous examples, or these were groundbreaking cases of use of VR. They get quoted a lot. Like every article you read about VR, you always hear about these super famous cases where VR was used successfully and where it added a value to a campaign. The first one was the Marriott teleporter, where you could like enter this teleporting thing, put on a headset, and visit the different Marriott hotel destinations. And the New York Times Magazine displays was about refugees. That's probably the most famous case of all of them, because they actually shipped out, I don't know how many headsets, like a million, huh? A million, yeah, of these cardboards to their subscribers. So that was a huge thing. And the Volvo campaign for one of their new SUVs to experience the vehicle from inside. So these are super famous campaigns that were very successful, and will probably be in the history books. I just wanted to talk about one interesting film, and that's from, I'm speaking now from a consumer perspective, because I actually saw it on the Gear VR. It's an interesting case study in terms in context of documentary film. Has anyone seen that film? 0 Days? It's called 0 Days. I think it came out late last year or earlier this year. The director is, what's his name? He also made the documentary about Scientology going clear.
Alex Gibson.
Yeah, right. So it's a fabulous film, and I think it's a great case study because it's really top notch. It's top notch. It doesn't get any better than this, because also he used VR in exactly the right way. I think a documentary filmmaker should use VR, because he created an experience that actually is an add-on that adds extra value to the documentary film. So the documentary film itself is great. It's very interesting. It's a well-done film. But the VR experience is something completely different. The documentary film is about cyber warfare, and cyber warfare, how a virus was created by, I think, with the US in cooperation with Israel to attack Iran. And a super interesting story with a lot of background info. And in the VR experience, you actually take on the perspective of the virus, and you travel through the network from the perspective of the virus, and it gives you a totally new insight on how this works. So it really adds a complete new layer of information on the documentary film. So it's not just some lame spin-off. It's something that really adds to the message of the film. And I can recommend it. It's free on the Gear VR. If you have a friend or have a Gear VR yourself, it's really worth to check it out. And I think if you have a Rift, you have to pay $10. You know, okay. And basically, what this is, it's motion graphics. It's a motion graphics animation that shows the perspective of the virus, how the virus travels through the network and attacks a nuclear facility. And it's done really well. It's very stylish, and it's really well done. So I think at the moment, this is the top-notch example for how you can really add value to a documentary film with a VR experience. And for me, it was, I don't follow documentary films that much, and for me it's like I came across this, and then I got really interested in seeing the actual film, so then I actually made an extra effort to get to see the film. So it worked for me, for example, you know. So I saw the VR thing, I was, wow, I want to see the film, you know, so this is how it works. Okay. And so here are some screenshots. This is a movie poster, and these are screenshots from the VR experience. I have it, by the way, on my Gear VR if someone wants to have a look at it. So what's interesting about 0 Days VR is that it also uses the depth kit, the volumetric VR video that Lionel was mentioning earlier, which is still experimental technology. It looks kind of rough, you know, as we saw in the blackout video. You have a lot of pixels and triangles flying around. But it's very effective. It all depends on the context. In this context, it worked really well because it's a cyber warfare. Everything is computer related. So in this context, it works really well. It was done in Unity with motion graphics, and as I said, it's a perspective of the virus. It's very stylish and helps the storytelling, or I would say, it adds a new level to the storytelling of the film. So okay, this was just a general talk about stuff that, you know, I wanted to share. I wanted to talk a little bit about stuff I'm doing. Actually, I met Ruth because her friend is a producer of The Future is Wild. I've been doing a VR experience for The Future is Wild, and this is still ongoing. The Future is Wild was a TV show a while back on the subject matter of speculative evolution, like how the planet would look like in 200 million years, what kind of creatures you would encounter. It's a great IP, and we were doing a VR experience based on that. I did a little teaser for the Cannes MIPCOM thing. But this is an ongoing thing I'm working on, and the other projects I'm working on is right now, and that's actually I'm going to share some notes of this ongoing thing that I'm doing at the moment. Right now I'm doing a music video. Actually it's 20 different VR scenes that are for a synthwave project. And what I'm doing is I'm basically generating footage for the video, but I'm also doing as an add-on a VR, like small VR experiences that go along with the video. Then I'm working on a VR review site, which is coming out soon. Then there's a title I'm working on, paradoxon.com, which is coming out next year. And cgartist.com is actually a VR and 3D marketplace that's also not finished yet, but I hope soon, so I'm working on that. So as I said, I wanted to talk briefly about the project I'm currently working on. It's a very specific thing. It's basically a CG production. It's pretty straightforward. Are you guys familiar with synthwave? Anyone? So synthwave is like a music trend that became really big in the last 5 years, and synthwave is references 80s cyberpunk or like horror flicks, like from Carpenter horror flicks and stuff. It became really popular when Stranger Things, the TV show, came out, because one of the big acts of one of the big synthwave acts, the band Survive, did the soundtrack for Stranger Things. So here's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm doing like a look development, and I have to. I kind of want to create like a simple, like kind of retro a foggy cyber world, and of course I have a lot of limitations for that, because it has to run on a mobile headset, so I cannot go crazy. So the forms have to be simple, and it has to be, but it still have to be immersive. So here is a concept I did, just scribbled the idea. So basically these pyramids, and there's a grid at the bottom that's underground. And this is the final look in the Unreal Engine. And the tools that I use to do CG for VR, I mentioned earlier my main tool is the Unreal Engine, the competition to Unity, and there's a bunch of other tools for modeling, texturing, sculpting. And I mean, what has changed these days, like in the old days, you had like one application like Maya or 3D Studio Max that was doing everything. These days, like everything is becoming more scattered. You have more specialized applications for each specific task. So, which is good in a way, because all of these applications are very focused on what they do best. So here's my workflow. I basically create a low poly environment. I model it out after the sketches. I usually use Modo or Blender. Blender is open source, it's free. By the way, Unreal is also free to use. If you want to, it's one thing I have to say about Unreal is that it's more accessible than people think. People always think Unreal is so complicated, but I believe it's actually quite accessible, and I think it's worth to try it out if you're a filmmaker, because in the future this will play a big role. Game engines are going to be more important in the future. Anyway, so this is the modeling workflow. Then here's my scene setup. I basically model things out, put them in a scene in Unreal, and assemble the scene and put the scene elements, arrange everything. And here's the interface of Unreal. And as I said, Unreal is a competitor to Unity. I used to use Unity, but I changed to Unreal because I think Unreal is just so much better. You know, it's like why should I drive a Toyota when I can drive a Rolls-Royce? You know, I mean, it's just a much better user experience. And basically, here's some simple examples of how some of the key features, like how you put stuff together in Unreal, is actually not that complicated. You know, it's a node-based system, so each node has instructions. You have on the left-hand side is it's a simple material node where I've added a glow as a emissive material. Then in the middle here is an example of the visual scripting system, which I think is also very accessible to people. You know, if you're not a coder, it's also a great way to learn coding through visual coding, through the visual editor, because by plugging pieces of code together in a visual scripting environment, you kind of learn how coding actually works. And the last piece here is the sequencer, which is the animation tool in Unreal. Okay. So here are some views of the final app. So I mean, it's just like, because for this synthwave project, I have like to create like 20 environments like this, and all of them have to be kind of simple, and they have to be a bit retro, 80s. A bit of the Tron thing has to be in there, but it can. So on this environment, I focused on these pyramids and the underground grid, and there's a bit of a storytelling in it, where you have two drones that have a relationship to each other, and the drone design is the next example of the workflow. I mean, this is very CG related, but I think CG is always of interest to filmmakers, because, you know, these days the lines are blurred between like what is filmmaking, what is CG, you know, and I think it's good to know how things work. And so basically, there's a low polygon model, then there's the high detail sculpted model, and then later you extract the maps and put it together in the engine to simulate like a high polygon surface detail. So this is like a final scene with the drone in there, and so the drone is, so basically the storytelling revolves around the drone. So basically the idea is that this drone has a bit of a different look. It has more surface detail, and the environment is very simplified. So one point why I'm explaining this is that the great thing is when you produce CG stuff in Unreal, there's different ways how you can exploit your work. You know, you can output it as a 360 panorama. You know, so for example, I did this 2 days ago. Just took this simple scene. This is a panorama screenshot, and I exported it and just put it on my Facebook page. You can check it out, facebook.com cgartistjobs. And you can check out the 360. I mean, it's just a 360 environment. And then I can output the stereoscopic Oculus Gear VR app. I can generate footage for the actual music video. And so basically I can export to different formats. So once the job is finished, once I've created the virtual world inside of Unreal, I have all these options to do stuff with it, you know. Okay, I think this is it. Yeah, thank you very much. So basically, I hope it was not too long. Any questions?